with that. So are we then ready for new learnings? Well, not yet. Secondly, the working memory will fill up with emotional data. We all know that feeling, right? That the emotions are getting the better hand of us. Either we are so excited that we cannot think of anything else, or we are so irritated that it just takes over and I cannot focus on my job, or I'm sad because something happened in my personal life and I do want to focus on work, but like nothing is sticking. We all know that, and that is because the emotional data is prioritized over new information that we want to learn or anything. Now there's also another type of emotional data, and that has to do with your past experiences. So let's say we're at a conference, you went to a talk during the last couple of days, and you went in, and when you were sitting there during that talk, the feeling of unease grew. Like you were feeling not in the right place, you didn't really get it, you thought like, oh man, this is way too complex for me. Maybe like at the end of the talk, you even had a little bit like lower self-esteem, like, man, I'm really not catching up on this. Now, what happens is the next time you are confronted with that same topic, your brain, just like it wants to prevent you from life-threatening situations, it also wants to prevent you from having a negative experience again. So when that topic arises again, it's kind of saying like, no, rather not. I'm rather not putting my focus on that. I'd rather check my email, or I'd rather go out for a drink or anything. Of course, we can overcome that. We can say deliberately to our brain, no, I need to be a grown-up woman. I need to overcome this feeling and focus on it. But like, if you just like listen to your instincts, probably you rather do something else because you don't want to have that negative emotion again. Now, if that is not at stake, we don't have life-threatening situations, then we have time for new learnings. So just be aware of that whenever you are not feeling well. Don't be too hard on yourself. Emotions are coming before the new information. Now, lucky us, new information is entering the working memory in this scenario, but it's a given that unfortunately we are losing most of the information within 24 hours. So that means that that information didn't really reach the long-term memory in the first place. Now, of course, it would be nice if we know upfront a little bit on what are the indicators that makes if information will stick, right? Because then we can tweak on those a little bit. Well, the two biggest determining factors would be sense and meaning. It's not responding. Yes. Okay, first, sense. What is sense? Well, sense basically means if you understand it. Does the content literally make sense to you? And this is all based on your past experience. So what actually kind of happens is that when new information is coming in, then you go to your long-term memory and you're kind of like looking around like, hey, does anyone have related information due to like compared to this new information? Do you have something? And you're gathering all of that information and taking it back to your working memory. Now, the more information that you were able to gather, the more easy you can learn because you can build upon that. The more sense it makes to you. Now, the second factor would be meaning. This has everything to do with the here and now. So, what is the relevance at this moment? Why do you need to know it? Maybe, and I bet one or two of you had this situation, maybe one or two of you went during those days to one of those incredibly interesting AI talks, generative AI, the new buzzword. We all want to hear something about it. However, you are working in a company where you are pretty sure within the next couple of years, you are not going to use that technology because like regulations and compliancy. And you also have a very like busy private life, so like hobby projects, you really want to work on them, but like don't really have the time for it. Then those talks can really be inspiring. They can leave an emotion, But probably the details of that talk will be lost within 24 hours because the meaning was very low to you. Now, if you know these two factors, you can also tweak them a little bit. But we will see that later on how you can add relevance and so meaning and sense to your learnings. Now, I think it's good to know how we store and retrieve stuff. So how our brain basically works is that whenever we have new learnings, we store that by similarity. So when I want to learn about IntelliJ, I'm going to store all of that information somewhere near my other IDEs, somewhere near that area. However, if I later on want to retrieve that information, of course, it doesn't make sense if I go to that AI or IDE spot and I retrieve information of Eclipse. So I want to retrieve it by differences. I want to retrieve by what makes it unique, so I retrieve the right information. Is it my clicker is really not in my... Yes, okay, so, it's having a little bit of a delay. Well, there you go, already 2 steps ahead. Retrieval types. We have 2 types of retrieval. The first one would be recognition. And recognition, okay, this will be an interesting clicker talk. However, retrieval of recognition. Recognition is basically a one-to-one map from something you see in the outside world, and that maps to your inner world. So what can there be in IT? Well, a retrieval type of type recognition would, for example, be syntaxes. Whenever I look at a for loop, I recognize the pattern, I recognize the syntax of it, and I immediately know I need to go there in that space in my brain, and this is a for loop. That is quite different from the second type, recalling, which is a way more complicated and maybe also elegant way of retrieving information. It is when you are going to your long-term memory sites and are going through multiple places to gather information and to see how you can combine that into one big opinion or like learning or anything. Now, unfortunately, our retrievals aren't always successful. But what can that depend on? Well, first of all, kicking in this open door here, of course, the adequacy of the queue. Imagine walking around with a queue that is either fake or maybe even wrong. Of course, you are not retrieving the right data, of course. So, adequacy of the queue, important for retrieval. Secondly, we've already seen the... hello? Yeah. Moods. The mood assembly. I just need to be more patient, which is not really my forte, but okay. So mood assemblies. Secondly, we already seen the importance, right, of moods and beliefs, and that really influences if you are going to retrieve something. Because if you have a very strong opinion about something, you are either really likely to retrieve it or really unlikely to retrieve it. Makes sense, right? Thirdly, the context of the retrieval. You might have heard before that when you are listening to certain music while learning something new, the likelihood of you remembering the learning is more likely to retrieve that when you're listening again to the same music later on. Now, what you're not maybe aware of is that whenever you are learning, you are taking in a lot of experiences at the same time. So you're not only taking in the learning, you're also taking in the hearing, so the music, for example, also the environment, so in which room are you? And all of those neurons, which are the workers inside the brain, all of those neurons are at that moment firing together. Now, the more often you repeat those neurons that are then firing together, the more they also are wiring together, the more they are growing to be one thing that can trigger the other. So if you're listening always to Mozart, then at one point Mozart can trigger you thinking about GraalVM all the time. Lastly, and I think most importantly, the retrieval depends on the system of storage. So What is that? Basically, that means that the long-term memory can be organized in various different ways. Now, fun fact is that the way you retrieve stuff is independent of the rate how you learn stuff. So it can very well be that you are a very quick learner, you take it in very easily, but you just throw it on a big pile. And there you have that spaghetti code inside your own brain. So that's quite hard to retrieve later on, right? And it can also be the other way around. Like, you can be a very slow learner, but when you store it, you have like a very organized system. So later on, when you want to retrieve it, you know, hey, I can skip this area because I know it will not be there, and I just need to focus on this part to retrieve it. Now, luckily for us, the system of storage, so the way we organize our brain, is a learned skill. We can learn how to organize our brain in the most structured and organized way possible. And the two biggest factors to do that is by adding those two components to your learning. So whenever you are learning, you want to start with identifying the critical attributes. They are, like, I already gave it a little bit away with the fact that we are retrieving by differences, right? So the critical attributes or the differences, what makes it stand out, what makes this learning unique, this concept unique, is like adding tags on your file system. Instead of needing to read an entire book to see if there's related content, you can just get it by the tags. So that's why if you want to have a new learning, you want to identify those unique elements first. Secondly, chunking. Now, chunking is a little bit more vague, so let me dive into that a little bit further. Chunking can be done in two parts. First, pattern chunking. Now, what is pattern chunking? It's a step-by-step procedure. It is if you would learn the lyrics of a song. So you are first learning the words, then the first word will trigger the sentence. If you repeat the verse often enough, then the first word will trigger the entire verse, because that is all chunked together. Now, we do the same in IT when we are learning syntaxes. When I am learning, for example, I'm just taking the easy examples, the for loop. First of all, it will be consisting out of 3 parts, right? I'm learning the 3 parts individually. But at one point, I repeated that so often that I now know the for loop is just one big sentence to me. Now, the second part is if you are learning about concepts. So concepts are a lot broader, right? They cannot be just learned by a step-by-step procedure. So we want to chunk them in a categorical way. Now, the funny thing is, when I ask people to chunk in a categorical way, they often already dive in too deep. What if I ask you, can you please tell me the category, or can you please categorical chunk databases for me? I think most of you will already dive in. Okay, I can do that. I have relational databases, non-relational databases. Then I have a few examples here, I have a few examples there, etc., etc. You can do that. However, this mind map, this way of organizing, is not something you can use on other concepts. You cannot use the two principles, relational databases and non-relational databases, if you're learning about certificates. So you want to take it to a more abstract place. You want to, when you are searching in your brain, you want to funnel down, right? You want to start at a more abstract level. So if you are learning new concepts, I recommend that you start categorically chunking by something that you can add to every new learning. You are starting with categorical chunking it by naming the similarities and differences, the advantages and disadvantages, the structure, the function, the taxonomy. So that's the hierarchical part. That's actually where you get into the relational, non-relational, That's where that comes in. But you see, it's already more down the funnel, right? And lastly, the arrays. Sometimes you just need to learn stuff by heart. And arrays is actually, again, pattern chunking, right? If you're just like learning by heart a certain list. So that's how we can chunk. Now, I have a little exercise which you can perform if you like in your whenever you are learning. And this exercise gives you like tools to see how well your brain is already chunked. So take a code snippet. Shouldn't be longer than 50 lines, and you should be somewhat familiar with it. It shouldn't be something you never looked at, and you shouldn't know it by heart. Now look at that code snippet for about 2 minutes, and then cover it up. Take a new new page and write down whatever you know. Now until step 3. This is not the chunking part. This only shows you how you have chunked your brain so far. So it's kind of an indicator how far you are in this chunking process. Now, when you are analyzing how much you did recall, you can see the gaps that you are still having. So was it because you didn't know certain concepts? Or was it maybe because stuff isn't yet related to each other? They are just bits and pieces, so like not really chunked, but just loose threads. And that can give you an indicator on where you can focus on with then the tips I gave you on the previous slide with categorical chunking, like writing that down. And if you really want to take it up a notch, compare it to someone else. Because it's a given that no one in this room will experience this talk the same way as you do. Because all our experiences are built upon our previous experiences, and no one will have the same experience. So even identical twins are experiencing the world in a different way. So that's why it's so interesting to compare it to somebody else, because we can learn so greatly from each other because we have another background, we have another view. All right, let me look at the time. Perfect. Okay, we're right on time. And I actually, I want to ask something of you. And I know it's always a little bit challenging to ask something of developers in a conference, but it really helps my talk if you like help me a little bit out here, because I really like to preach what I learned. Preach what I learned. No. Practice what you preach. There you go. Thank you. Thanks. So yeah, it will really help me and my talk if you engage in this. So can you please stand up? Awesome, guys. Really appreciate this. Okay, and now I'm going to give you some time. You can wiggle around a little bit with your arms and legs, just like, doesn't need to be anything interesting. And now I'm going to give you a few seconds. Just I see people already stopping. It's the idea that we keep on wiggling, and then you are going to think about what I just talked about, and going to see what is the most interesting thing that keeps hanging around in your brain. Like what? I'm not going to ask anyone. It's just something for yourself. Please do that, and I'm going to drink some water. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Yeah. Wiggly, wiggly. All right, cool. Sit down. Thank you so much. Applause for yourself. All right, the key takeaways. We're not there yet. Like it's not the end. I'm not letting you go yet. But we are going to see what are the key takeaways until now. Now, there was no wrong or right, whatever you thought of. But I'm just naming some things that I think was most important about the first part of my talk. So firstly, I think it's important that we remember that we need to add sense and meaning to our learnings, because those are the two biggest indicators if stuff will hang around after 24 hours. So we want to understand it based on our past experience, and we want to make sure that it's relevant to us. Secondly, we want to teach the differences first, identify the critical attributes, make the unique elements stand out. And lastly, I would say deliberately chunk your knowledge together, because that will lead to a highly organized long-term memory storage. Now, maybe some of you already also thought about emotions. I was like also doubting myself, should I write it on there? But you need to make a choice, huh? So emotions didn't make the cut. But yeah, well, that was it for the first part. Hello? It's time for time. All right, so during the entire day, we are going through numerous cycles. And those are automatic processes by our body. Breathing, heartbeat, emotions, body temperature, stuff like that. We don't have influences on it, and it's basically occurring because of light and darkness. So they are like what we also call the biological clock, stuff like that. Now, research has shown that there is something that we call the dark hole of learning. Yeah, that sounds really intriguing, right? So it's the lowest point of focus during the day. And as you can see on the graph below, and you should probably, for most of us, look at the green line, which is post-adolescent, or with an ugly word, adults. The green line. So the dark hole of learning is somewhere between 1 and 2. Now, if you have new learnings, for example, you're participating in a course, or you are scheduling in a learning episode, but also if you're just picking up a new task and you need to like integrate a new technique into your current code stack, right? We do that all the time. So you're also learning on the job. So if you have new information that is coming in, preferably do that in the morning. If you cannot, take it to the later afternoon. So 5 p.m. having a talk at JCon isn't actually too bad. We're actually pretty good. Like, it could be way worse. Now, you can also like maybe talk around with your team if you recognize this, that you always are having that low around 1 and 2 to shift your lunch break. Could be like just a suggestion. So you can plan a little bit ahead for your learning, right? When are you going to do or integrate new information into your day? Now, another element that you can focus on is not as much when you are starting with your learning, but to plan ahead for your learning, so your learning episode, so to say. Because there's something we call the primary recency effect. And it basically means that we remember best what came first, and second best what came last. And we tend to forget what was in the middle. Now, there's actually a very easy explanation for that. I talked already about the working memory, right? And that it had limited capacity. So what happens during the new learning? Our memory, working memory, I mean, is filling up with new information. And then at one point, you try to, or you feel a little bit fatigue. You feel that your focus is slipping. You kind of tend to reach with your arm to that phone and social media. Those are all symptoms that your brain is probably heading towards the end of your working memory limit. And it's a sign that your brain needs some time in order to organize everything that is in here and to open up some space for new learnings. Now, that is actually what I was trying to do just a bit ago with like you standing up, thinking about what we just learned. Because when you are slipping down, you don't want to overflow your brain with new information, because unfortunately, full is full, at least in the working memory. So you cannot overflow that working memory, or you can, but it will not stick around. So you want to give your brain some time. Now you can do that in numerous ways. One thing is move around. It's a given, and it's really proven that after only 20 minutes of sitting down, and this is important for us developers, after only 20 minutes of sitting down, the blood flow is decreasing because all our blood is staying in our legs, and the blood, which carries oxygen, is not going to the brain. So that is reducing our focus, reducing our cognitive impact that we can make. So what we want to do, it's very easy, is walk around a bit, because after only 1 minute of moving and walking around, already 15% more oxygen is headed and transported towards the brain. So that's actually a great tip. And that's why, just think about, we think better on our feet than we do on our seats. So just take that from today. Now, the downtime is something we can plan for, because if you know that it exists, you can plan ahead for it, right? So you can say, okay, I'm first starting with new information. Then after a while, and you can already, like you will see in a bit, you can literally plan it. Okay, I'm doing after 20 minutes, I'm calculating in this break or anything. You can also notice it when your focus is slipping. I'm getting that like break, and that break, I'm not going to intake new information. I can spend the time on walking around. I can spend the time on practicing with what I have in my working memory, because it's fine to work with the information. It's actually very good to work with the information, because the more you deepen that information, the more you will organize it, and you will like cluster it together, opening up space for new learnings. What you don't want to do is scroll around on Twitter or X or anything else, because we all know how that goes, right? We never get to primetime 2. Yeah. So after that, you can head to primetime 2, and you can like work again with the information, or you can research some new stuff. Now, it's interesting that downtime does increase by ratio the longer you have a learning episode. So if you have a learning episode of 20 minutes, the downtime is only 2 minutes, approximately, right? This is all like approximately based on research. So only 2 minutes. If you take that to 40 minutes, the downtime is already increasing to 25%. And if you're increasing that to 80 minutes of learning, you have an increase, or you have a downtime of 38%. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you should never have a longer learning episode, but you can plan ahead for it. Either you can say, okay, I take that 25%, I deal with that by creating practice time for myself, and I have some assignments which I can practice on. Or you're saying, no, I'm going to do it in such a way that I'm taking, instead of learning an entire hour consecutive, I'm going to split it up in 3 blocks. And yes, that actually works. So let's see how that would look like. Let's say we want to learn about pattern matching. Now, I have an hour, so how I'm going to schedule in my time? Well, the first 20 minutes, I'm going to research pattern matching for switch statements. And I'm doing that because I'm somewhat familiar with switch statements, so I can add it to my past learnings of switch statements. So the sense of the topic is already pretty okay. And I'm going to research. After 20 minutes, or after 10 minutes actually, because those are 20 minutes intervals, after 10 minutes I'm going for a small water break, because I know my brain loves water. I want to stay hydrated. So I'm going to the kitchen, get a glass of water, go back, ta-da-da-da-da, sit down. I'm going to implement pattern matching for a switch statement. Writing a class, it's not too hard. So after a few minutes, I have some time left, and I'm going to do journal writing. What do you say? You want me to write a diary? Oh man, I'm not 12 anymore. No guys, I'm not talking about that. Journal writing is a practice where you take 3 to 5 minutes and you ask yourself 3 important questions. 1, what did I learn? 2, how does this relate to my past experience, to what I already know? Adding sense. Do we see it? Adding sense to the new learning. Thirdly, how can I use this information in the future, and how can it help me? Adding meaning. All right, 20 minutes are over. We are now heading towards our second block of learning. Of course, I'm starting with walking around, because we want to keep our blood flow moving. And after that, I'm sitting down. I'm doing some research for pattern matching now, for instance, of. And after a minute, or after 10 minutes, I'm doing another water break. It's 20 minutes already, so let's go to the kitchen again, get some glass of water. I'm doing some practice, and after, I'm going to look through my existing code base. I'm going to see, hey, did already somebody before me implement one of those switch and instance of? And if not, do I see use cases where I can later on maybe apply it to? Adding meaning. Do we see it? I'm just pointing it out here, but this is how you add sense and meaning to your learnings. All right, last block. I am now going to research pattern matching in record patterns, and I'm doing this lastly because I feel it's the most complicated. So I want to have previous learnings about pattern matching before immediately diving into this like somewhat more difficult topic. After 10 minutes, I definitely need a toilet break because I had 2 glasses of water. So, like, let's go for a toilet break now. I'm going to practice a little bit with it. And lastly, I'm going to explain it to others. I'm going to Teams calls or Skype call or like a Slack call my colleague, and I'm going to tell them about this incredibly new learning I had, because whoever explains learns. This is what we call the production effect, and it's actually scientifically proven that we are far, far more likely to retain information if we tell it to somebody else. All right. So during our learnings, we want to cluster the information, chunk the information, try to organize it in such a way that we will retain it after those incredibly important 24 hours, right? Now, our brain really loves visual components. He really, really enjoys it. And it's because our brain has both like storage sites and processors for visual components as it has for textual components. So it really likes to have both of them to increase the understanding of a certain concept. So instead of you just writing down whatever you know in, I don't know, Word or Notes or whatever you use, try to add a visual component and rather, like, of course, like draw it out in an actual sketchbook or something. Firstly, I want to go through an analogy map. I'm going to write down the new concept and the familiar concept because, as I said, we want to start with the differences first, right? So I'm going to write down what are the similarities, but more importantly, what makes it stand out? What are the differences? Now, you can write this just like as a list, but by using the actual map and the actual model, the visual component, it will stick around longer. You will see. Now, I have another few models. Most of you will know, but rehearsal is also key, right? So we're just going through them. The mind map, you all know. A core concept in the middle, related information around. A hierarchical map, which can be with the relational and the non-relational databases, right? Stuff like that. Maybe you want to learn about a domain process. Well, use a process diagram for that. But lastly, you can also use tables for certain stuff. You can use, is it just not, yeah. Sometimes I don't know, didn't I click? Or is it just coming? But yeah, it was coming. So you can also use a table for your learnings. For example, a great table you can use or a map is the KWL map. And it basically asks you, what do I know? What do I wonder? And what do I learn? What did I learn? The second question, what do I wonder, is somewhat vague, right? It's somewhat like maybe, what do I wonder? Well, I wonder about like if unicorns exist. No, but it's actually one of the most important questions of those 3. And why is that? It's what we call a higher order thinking question. And higher order thinking questions are components that train our critical thinking. And critical thinking is incredibly important in our field. Let alone, it's very important for you to learn new concepts. And critical thinking is actually a skill. So the more you train yourself in asking yourself higher order thinking questions, the more those questions will pop up automatically. But unfortunately, you need to train that because it's a skill. It's not learned by nature. We deliberately need to ask ourselves sometimes the questions. And at one point, maybe they will come automatically. But if you also stop with those deliberate questions, it can also, unfortunately, decrease again. Now, I don't have a lot of time, so like those are questions you can ask yourself take a picture or maybe see the slides later on. I'm not like naming all of them. And there are, of course, thousands more, right? We know, like, you know what I'm talking about. Now, of course, it's great if you go to a course. It's even better if you schedule in learning times. However, we don't always have time for that. And wouldn't it be great if we can learn on the job? Now, I think most of you already will think, now that I'm saying this, yeah, but I already do that. Like, I work with new techniques, right? Like, otherwise, how am I going to implement a new user story? However, I'm not sure if you recognize it, but I often have that I do research on a certain topic. I implement that user story, and well, unless it was really difficult and I really needed to like engage a longer time in it, like I already forgot a lot of it that I researched because I didn't really deliberately add it to my long-term memory. Now, how can we learn while we code? Well, a good practice would be to, when you pick up a new user story, before you dive into the solution, navigate to your code stack. Take 10 minutes to read through that code stack, read through the project, and write down the most important elements, but also the concepts that you didn't fully understand yet. The parts that made you wonder, like, okay, I think I kind of know what this does, but I don't really fully comprehend. Then after 10 minutes, well, do some star jumps, take a glass of water, go to the toilet. And then in the last 8 minutes, you're going to research what you didn't fully understand yet. And you're going to ask yourself, on that code, that existing code, not related to the solution that you're going to look at later, hey, what are the benefits of this code? And what are the potential downsides of this code? How could I improve it? Or do I have any alternative solutions? Those are also higher order thinking questions, right? And they will keep us thinking. And because we used 20 minutes before we actually dive in, we did two things. One, we made sure that our sense was already a lot higher before implementing new techniques, before going to learn something new. So it was easier for us to pick up the task later on. And secondly, we had a chance to learn something new, to see what didn't we chunk yet, what didn't we know yet. And it was only 20 minutes. I think you can like save yourself 20 minutes. All right, practice makes perfect, right? That's a lie. Practice doesn't make perfect, but it does make permanent. And you can ask my girlfriend that, because I have been driving the car for 13 years now. So you would think I'm perfect in driving the car. Well, she bad, and she thinks I'm not. So why is it that after 13 years of driving the car, I am not near like perfect? Well, first of all, I think I'm actually pretty great in driving the car. So my motivation to improve was until recently very low. Now she doesn't want to get in a car with me anymore, so now I'm like kind of like I have motivation now to improve. But like beforehand, I thought I was pretty great. So no real reason to improve, right? So first of all, if you want to improve, you need to work on your motivation. Secondly, it's kind of useful to know what you can improve on. So I kind of know now that I'm not a star in parallel parking. It's a challenge. But I also don't really know what the rules were because I got taught 13 years ago. So right, I did know once, but I don't know yet anymore. So like I don't really have the knowledge yet to improve. So of course we need knowledge to improve. And lastly, we need to be able to reflect on our practice. So maybe I now know how I should parallel park, but I need to be able to reflect on it, because to be honest, if I parallel park and the first time goes wrong, which it mostly does, then in my case, I just try 5 times and 1 time it will succeed. But that will not really help me to improve, right? Because I didn't really know why it worked the 5th time. So I need to be able to reflect on my behavior. So what determines if my learning has a great success rate? Well, a little bit of rehearsal, the first 2 at least. First of all, our emotions need to be in the right place, right? They are the gatekeepers. If they are not aligned, the success rate is pretty low. Secondly, we need to add sense and meaning. We need to understand what we are learning. And it needs to be relevant. Thirdly, I kind of want to know what comes next before. Yeah, accountability. Accountability. So it is great if you have learnings to actually do goal setting. And luckily, can I see some hands who is German? German people in the room, huh? Okay. Well, I heard you guys are punctual. So you are probably doing a great job in this. For all the others, set some goals. Yeah? Okay. Fourthly, complexity. Of course, you need to build it upon previous knowledge. If it's too complex, it will not stick around. And lastly, how it is presented to you. Because, just as I said before, we are all experiencing the same thing in a different way. So it can very well be that somebody is explaining a certain learning to you and that it doesn't connect to your past learnings. And it's not that the person explained it in a wrong way, it's just not connecting to your past learnings and it doesn't make sense in that way. So find yourself someone or something that connects to you, and like if one talk didn't connect with you, it's definitely not a given that a second talk about the same topic will also be a blur for you. All right, how long do I have? Oh, I'm off. I should have checked that before. So, okay, critical thinking, artificial intelligence. I'm not going to stick around for this because unfortunately I have 1 minute and it's the end of the talk. So, yeah, I had some like pros and cons. And like it basically comes down to that I think that artificial intelligence is a great assistant in helping someone to learn. It's really not responding to my clicks as well. Yeah, and it's always available, right? And on the other hand, we become often over-reliant on it. We are not asking the right questions and stuff. But what I want to give with you is that artificial intelligence is a tool, and we should see it for what it is. It is a tool, whereas critical thinking is a skill. So instead of saying they are or comparing them to each other, we should see it as follows. We should apply the skill to the tool. And we can do that deliberately because critical thinking is something we learn and something we train. Now, the key takeaways, you have seen the first three. So we can skip a little bit through that if it's responding. Yeah, these are differences first. Hey, that's weird. Okay, plan your, I missed there something. What was it? Sense and meaning, differences first. Chunking, thank you. He learned something. Fourthly, plan your meeting. Deliberately think ahead. What are you going to do while you are learning? Think of prime time and downtime, and keep asking yourself higher order thinking questions in order to stimulate your critical thinking. Hey, there we go. These were some of my sources, but I skipped through them. You can see them in the slides later on. Thank you so much for hanging on. It's the end of JCon. Thank you so much for being at this conference, for engaging in the community. If you have some questions, come to me because I know like it's the last talk, so probably some of you want to go. I really, really want to thank you. One last big applause for yourself.